Hello again, everyone. Welcome to Washington Gun Law TV. I am Washington Gun Law President William Kirk. Thanks for joining us. This is a video for the hometown crowd. We are recording this video a little after 5:30 on Thursday, February 1. I'm actually going to try to get this video out to you guys tonight. Now, this is important. We are at that point, that very, very important point of the legislative session known as fish or cut bait. That is either these bills that are being introduced, especially what we're going to be focusing on here today is the civilian disarmament bills, either get out of their house of origin by the end of this week, or they are pretty much done with. What we're going to do is we're going to go through every single civilian disarmament piece of legislation, tell you exactly where they are. We're going to make some predictions on which ones are still alive and which ones we can probably, or at least pretty much call dead right now. So today, let's slow it all down. Let's spend a few minutes and let's talk about the dangerous crossroads of this legislative session. Okay, before we get going too far down the road we're going down, let's remember that this Saturday, February 3rd, 6 p.m., live at Securite Gun Club, Washington Gun Law and the Conservative Ladies of Washington, we'll be doing our first ever Saturday Night Live event. This will be streamed live out here to the YouTuberverse, but we want you to join us at Securite Gun Club starting at 6 p.m. to be part of our live audience. And then when we're done at 7, we know that many of you will have worked up a thirst. We're all going to go over to Triplehorn Brewing, and we are going to have an hour's worth of refreshments, and we'll get to geek out some more about the laws. So join us Saturday night, 6 p.m., February 3rd, Securite Gun Club for our first ever Saturday Night Live, brought to you by the Conservative Ladies of Washington. Okay, Washington, we're going to go through this fast and furious. I got my notes right here, my handy dandy little notes. So if I'm looking down, I apologize. We're doing this kind of on the fly. This is going to be a little bit of a sloppy video compared to what I normally do. Some of you may think my videos are always crap, so it probably won't be a problem. But this one's going to be a little more rough because I want to get this out to you so fast. I'm going to go through all the House bills. I'm going to give you some predictions on each and every one of those. And then we're going to go through the Senate bills. And honestly, this is, in a nutshell, Washington, I know that you guys have been absolutely kneed in the groin, punched in the gut, elbowed in the mouth for the last few years by your legislature, and I totally get that. If my predictions prove to be correct here, and that's a huge if, this will not be that bad of a year for the average lawful and responsible gun owner. However, it will be a devastating year for the FFL industry, which in turn means that it is devastating for every one of us because we all depend so heavily on the FFL industry. Here we go. House Bill 1178, do away with state preemption. I know I've been freaking out about it for a couple of years. None of you have. As it turns out, you're probably right. I was overreacting. That bill, it didn't even get a hearing. It did not even get a hearing. It sits there dormant. I don't see this one getting any movement. This is wonderful news for us because can you imagine the city of Seattle making their own gun laws? So 1178 right now, there is literally, it's flatlining, okay? Now, 1902. This is the pre-purchasing licensing bill. This was one that was very, very offensive. And this is, as you recall, everything that was taken out of 1143 was going to get put back in. I thought that this is one that they would go for really, really hard. It had a public hearing back on January 16th when every one of these had a public hearing. And it has literally seen no action since then. None whatsoever. So 1902 right now we are predicting is not going anywhere. That's good. Now, 1903, which is civil liability for reporting lost or stolen firearms. Again, in the grand scheme of things that have happened to us here in the last few years, not that big of a deal as far as legislation goes. Now, that's sitting in rules too. If you understand how that works, that means it is basically just off the launching pad. It can be moved on to the launching pad at any moment. So our prediction is that 1903 is going to go to a House floor vote. Again, this just creates additional civil liability that when you learn that your firearms have been lost or stolen, you have to report it within 24 hours. Again, not the worst piece of legislation. Okay, House Bill 2021, which rewrites a few of the rules related to gun buybacks and what to do with curios and relics and what to do with firearms that are actually discovered to be stolen and getting them back to their original owners. Again, not the worst piece of legislation. That is also sitting in rules too. So just like 1903, the reporting lost stolen firearms, and then 2021 on the gun buybacks, those are both sitting just off the launching pad. But again, if those are the House bills that we had to live with this year, Could be a lot worse, all right? 2054, the dumbest piece of legislation. You can only buy one gun every 30. That has gotten a public hearing and nothing else. Candidly, it should never even gotten a public hearing, but that bill appears to be going nowhere, as it should be going nowhere. Now, this is the one I think we all need to circle, Washington, because this is the one that I'm most worried about right now. And if you're in the FFL industry, you're terrified of this one at the current time, okay? And that is 2118, okay? And this is a whole new slew of regulations on your FFL industry that will basically put just all but the big box stores out of business. And we're going to do some follow-up videos, especially if this thing does make it out of the House, because it becomes much more of a reality at that point. And you really need to understand that if you're relying on a Guardian Arms out there in Moses Lake, you're relying in a hole in the wall, a sharpshooting out there in Spokane, some of the more smaller independent FFLs, yeah, they are going to be in deep crap. If 2118, again, they call it the FFL security measure. I'm basically calling it the kill the FFL bill. So that's the one I want you all to really, really carefully watch. If you haven't contacted your legislator, get on the horn right now. Do that. Tell them that they absolutely have to stop 2118. Now, next House bill, 2238, the ammo tax. Figured this would be an easy one. You can imagine what the fiscal note is on it, because you're making nothing but money on an ammo tax. That is absolutely gone nowhere. It hasn't even gotten a committee hearing. Now, that's really what it should have gotten, is absolutely nothing. But Liz Berry's ammo tax, House Bill 2238, appears at this point to be going nowhere. We're going to predict that it's not going anywhere. 2332, which was a really goofy piece of legislation saying you can get cash rewards if you start ratting out people who commit violent gun crimes, which, you know, why we need a piece of legislation for that, whatever. That hasn't even gotten a committee hearing. It was a waste of paper, waste of time, waste of energy. So that bill appears. So right now, if we just take a look at the House bills, what we are concerned with is 1903, which is only a civil liability on reporting lost or stolen firearms, 2021, which really has some nominal effects on gun buybacks, and then 2118, which is a horrific, devastating piece of George Orwellian legislation. So that's what you need to watch. Now, on the Senate side, 5049, the one bill that we've actually talked about a couple times, said, hey, this is a really good piece of legislation. Yeah, that hasn't even gotten a committee hearing because, of course, it's a good piece of legislation. Now, 5444 creates a bunch of new sensitive places, gun-free zones. There was a late amendment that would exempt concealed carry holders from all of these places, which is at least a step in the right direction. Now, that is sitting in the Senate Ways and Means Committee, and if you understand how the Senate works as compared to how the House works, it's not too difficult to get it out of the Ways and Means and onto the launching pad. So right now in the Senate, what you got to watch is 5444, the new sensitive areas. And again, if you're a CPL holder in Washington State, that's going to have literally no effect on you. So it's, again, in the grand scheme of things, it's not the worst piece of legislation. And then finally, 5963. This is the one that I have not yet done a video on because I wanted to see if this thing really was going to come to reality. This is the mandatory liability insurance that if you have the audacity to exercise a constitutional right, you have to have additional liability insurance, which, by the way, I will tell you that your homeowner's insurance does cover you on accidental discharges, negligent discharges, intentional discharges, even in self-defense. That's a different story because that's an intentional act, and we'll do a video on that later on, and we can all geek out on that. But that got a public hearing back on January 29th, and it went into committee, and there's been no action on that. And this is a piece of legislation where the impact and all the other committees that would need to weigh in, it's a pretty complex piece of litigation because it brings in a lot of elements of various areas of the RCW. And so what I think we need to be aware of, and again, I'm just kind of looking into my crystal ball and trying to predict here, is that there's not a lot of time to do an awful lot of work that needs to be done on this bill. So I personally am predicting that 5963 is going to die on the vine this year simply because they just didn't have enough time to get to it. Now, don't be surprised if you don't see it under a different number in the next legislative session. And that's the thing you also need to remember is we are on a biennium legislative session, which means any of the bills that are not successful at being passed this year do in fact die altogether. They would need to be reintroduced next legislative session under different House or Senate bill numbers. So that is your update. Again, in a nutshell, we got to watch on the House side 1903 and 2021. However, they're not really terrible pieces of legislation. We do seriously need to watch 2118. And right now, 2118 is the one that we all really should be focusing our attention on as we sit today. On the Senate side right now, it appears only 54. 44 is the one that you need to be watching. Again, not the worst piece of legislation. And if you're a CPL holder, it's even more tolerable for you. Now, obviously, all of this is subject to change. Obviously, they could pull out an 11th hour thing. So we're going to very carefully be watching this. Now, can't just be dropping videos out here to the YouTuberverse all the time. So be careful that you can follow us primarily on Twitter. We're going to be doing as many live updates. It's right there. You can find Washington Gun Law at Gun Washington. Now, listen, we'll go ahead and link up all the information that we relied upon downstairs so you can geek out on it for yourself. If you got any other questions about this or anything else related to what's left of our Second Amendment rights, you guys should know how to get a hold of Washington Gun Law by now. If you don't, that's okay. That information is also down there in the description box. And then in the meantime, let's everyone remember that part of being the lawful and responsible gun owner, like we talk about all the time here, is to know what the law is in every situation, how it applies to you in any instance that you may find yourself. Until next time, thanks for watching. Stay safe.